Let's talk about the topic of circumcision. Let's start with Travis, and then people can hop in wherever they want, and I'll be right back.
Yeah, so with circumcision, I voted lean yes on outlawing it. In the case of an elective procedure for infants.
Mm.
I voted to not allow it for kids, but allow people as they get older to choose it if they so wish, but not to do it to like an infant. Infant doesn't have agency. There's no real good reason to do it. And I don't consider religious reason a good enough reason to mutilate somebody.
I voted to keep it legal, even though I consider it highly immoral.
Why?
On the grounds that it's, well, one of the main points that I pointed out is a comparison with other things that religious people do with their religious freedom that I consider much more harmful, and particularly teaching small children about eternal hellfire for people who don't accept the correct religion, causing
There's a kingdom
all
hall
kinds
right
of
up the road from
profound
me.
psychological trauma.
Mhm.
So if these things are going to be protected under religious freedom, because we don't want our country to be one in a constant state of religious civil war. Um, just because something is done to one is done to a physical body, and another is done to a young child's mind. If we're going to allow religious freedom to encompass the things that it does, then circumcision seems to fall into that category. So we should try to oppose it the way we oppose people teaching kids about hell. We should oppose it by persuasion and moral and rational and emotional arguments to get people to stop doing this stuff, because the alternative is, if you try to ban well-established religious practices, you're opening up your society to actual warfare, actual sectarian civil war.
I
Yeah,
voted.
yeah, I think that the circumcision would be kind of like the low hanging fruit. And I guess it's something a lot more people would agree upon and would be easier to implement. And where with, with the entire hell threatening thing, it's kind of in the basis of religion, and you are going to get religious, I guess, war like riots if you try to ban that.
Is there a difference between something being popular, therefore you're worried about banning it, and something being religious and worried about banning it? Because I feel like the religious idea itself, just maybe it can be a predictor that it will lead to like people having stronger convictions on it. But if a religion says that every Saturday you can kill a 5-year-old girl child, the religion itself, I don't think should affect if something should be legal or not. But maybe we feel differently about it if it is lower hanging fruit. Like if somebody wanted, their religion called for like a tribal face tattoo, and it was in the U.S., and somebody was going to get like a couple lines and dots on their child's face, would we outlaw that but maybe allow a tribal back tattoo because it's not as devastating to their future upbringing in a certain area? I guess the U.S. part doesn't matter, but
I mean, morally, I don't think that religious purposes should be considered, but again, practically, it's kind of like it's going to be easier to, let's say, ban gas chambers rather than ban forced breeding of animals, right? Because when people hear gas chambers, they associate it with lots of other things. And banning the breeding of animals, that's basically stopping animal agriculture. And I think
Based.
it's not exactly similar because here we're trying to um here circumcision is the low hanging fruit because it's not this essential to religion. It's
Mhm.
just some random unnecessary mutilation that the child's gonna have for life. And I do agree that the psychological damage is much it's a lot worse, but it's it's not gonna happen if you try to ban it.
I
Gotcha.
changed my mind. This isn't a physical change like circumcision, but I changed my mind in the last few years on hijab laws. I used to think that it should be banned in schools like they were doing in France because it's being culturally imposed in a sexist way upon the minor daughters from Muslim families. But then the argument got through to me that we ban going topless for our daughters and not our sons for pretty similar reasons, because we don't want we think it would instill like lust in the boys or something like that, or it would make our daughters look kind of culturally bad. And and what's the great difference between us and our arbitrary standard of dress and the Muslims and their arbitrary standard of dress? And so
Yeah, that's a fair point.
I decided that they should they should be allowed to have their culture for purposes of like societal stability and not causing a civil war. And then if you want to argue against Islam and you want to try to convince these girls to take off the hijab when they're old enough to make their own choice, then go for it. That's what I recommend. But I don't believe in the government bans.
All right, Phil, you're up.
Yeah,
I
Circumcision.
mean,
my
also,
position was to ban it, but provide for a religious exemption. Um, and I think that my line of thinking is the same along that Jeremy's is. The difference is that by actually banning it with the religious exemption instead of simply not banning it, then we're able to normalize the idea that penises are not going to be circumcised, right? So people get, at least in this country, in the United States, it's normal that men have circumcised penises. That's what women expect. Parents don't want their kids to be laughed at in a shower. It's about normalization. So, um, that's what people say. Oh, everybody else is doing it. And so if we ban it with a religious exemption, we're opening the door to someday it not being normal anymore. And that's why I have that position. And then from there, we will be able to ban it all the way. Now, if we're the senators of a new society, I wouldn't even necessarily have the religious exemption at all. I'd say no. Yeah, you're not allowed to cut off your kid's toes either because it's your religion. Okay, so it's all banned. It's only that the religious exemption would be a practical circumstance in the United States.
so
Gotcha.
do you guys know what percentage of men are circumcised in the United States?
I know with babies in the
Well,
past like
imagine.
4 years, it's switched over to about 55% of newborn babies in the past 4 years, and now are not circumcised, and then 45% are. But before the past like 4 years, it was the other way around. But as far as people that live in the U.S., adults, last time I looked, it was something like 70% are circumcised, maybe
Google says
closer.
80%, Dillian.
Oh, 80. Okay.
That's a lot. That's more than
Yeah.
I thought it would
And the
be.
U.S. is
That's a little
pretty
less than I
darn
thought.
alone, from my understanding, on this topic.
And if you're talking about like white, like further than first generation immigrant Americans, it's going to be way higher.
Yeah.
A lot of the men who aren't are like Hispanic recent immigrants. And
Yeah, growing up, I mean, I didn't see everybody's dick, but growing up, I can say with reasonable confidence that basically everyone I knew and was in my friend group was circumcised.
yeah, me too. In locker
When
rooms.
when
Yeah.
I was on the wrestling team, like I remember there was one kid on our team that wasn't, and like half of the dudes there would pick on him for it,
Oh
which is
man.
just such a. It's always struck me as such a weird thing to pick on somebody for. Because like at the end of the day, you could always
Oh, you
turn
got
that
it
around
right
and be
there.
a high school kid.
Damn. I mean, I
Just fuck
don't
with the
know if
boys.
I know anybody that's circumcised that I've met in person.
It's
Oh,
it's a big like cultural thing in America. Like even comedians talk about it in bits. Say like, "Oh, I just want my son's dick to look like mine, so he won't get made fun of when a girl tries to give him a blowjob." Like that's just like a big cultural thing here.
Let's see. Okay, so okay, yeah, and when we go over that one, so the rest of these laws, I'm going to specify some stuff with the prisons and waiting periods for assisted suicide. I think with the circumcision one, there doesn't need to be any other detail aside from pointing out that this is referring to minors. I didn't initially point that out because obviously, like, or I think obviously, when somebody turns 18, if they want part of their body cut or whatever, then that's fine to do. Um,
Or
do
pierced or tattooed.
And once you're
yeah.
18, you can get a Jacob's ladder on your dick if you want to. I don't care.